I'm part of the Natural Resources Defense Council, which is a nonprofit. Speaking on behalf of our several thousand members here in the Commonwealth. I'm a senior staff attorney at the NRDC. I've got 7 years of energy and regulatory experience. And I would actually like to just briefly, I won't make my comments long, I do want to briefly go through the lawful authority question as based on the intent of the General Assembly as far as what is in the statute, as far as the Air Board's regulatory authority, as well as briefly touch on the economic impacts. The clear authority as delegated by the General Assembly can be found, and I won't read a long section of the statute, but I do want to read one section to you in Chapter 13, Section 10.1 of the Virginia Code. It states that the Air Board shall have the power to promulgate regulations abating, controlling, and prohibiting air pollution throughout or in any part of the Commonwealth in accordance with the provisions of the Administrative Procedure Act. So I'll stress two things, the word shall and the phrase Administrative Procedure Act. The shall indicates a broad definition of authority to regulate air pollution. And indeed, the Air Board already does regulate carbon dioxide as an air pollutant, and the Air Board has already regulated carbon dioxide on the same basis that the governor has suggested, that is on a tonnage mass basis. I highlight the Administrative Procedure Act because, as the board has said, the process is absolutely and indeed is important, and it is a well-worn path. It actually cannot be fast-tracked under the law. The APA requires a full notice and comment, as has already been pointed out, and it also requires an economic impact analysis of a proposed regulation. This is part of the democratic process that I think all Virginians can look forward to as part of this democratic process of rulemaking. So there must be a rational basis to make a regulation, including an accounting of the economic impact. So I want to talk briefly about the economic impacts. As I understand it, the governor has called for, he cannot mandate, but he has called for a rulemaking that would be market-based. In other words, a market-based that allows for economic efficiencies. This would be, as I understand it, similar to President George H.W. Bush's acid rain cap and trade program that was market-based and that eliminated acid rain at virtually zero cost because it was market-based. What do we mean by market-based? It basically says set a pollution limit and let the market take care of the rest. Let as many market players take care of the rest. That brings down or eliminates costs, and I think that's what we can expect here in Virginia. You may know that Virginia, if we want to talk about costs, has the 10th highest electricity bills on average in the country. A lot of the reason for that is because we have virtually no solar, wind, or energy efficiency in this state, despite your best efforts, Senator, to increase that solar energy. The Natural Resources Defense Council found that if we do boost our renewable energy share here in Virginia and thereby cut carbon pollution in Virginia by 30%, the average Virginian would actually save an average of $96 per year. So that's actually a cost savings because you're tapping more clean energy resources.
If I could just,
sure.
Are you submitting to us that our kilowatt hour rate is the 10th highest in the nation?
The monthly...
Be careful.
Yeah.
Our kilowatt hour rate that the retail customer or the wholesale customer pays is the 10th highest in the nation. Is that what you're saying?
No. The customer pays bills, not rates, and the customer's average bill is the 10th highest in the nation.
So you're saying our customers are consuming more electricity than the average household?
I can't speak to their consumption. I can only speak to the Energy Information Administration says Virginia.
Well, unless you pass algebra, one would say that if our rates are significantly lower, but we're the 10th highest, then we're obviously, our customers are consuming more electricity.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to be very clear. Don't mislead the public here. Our rates are some of the most competitive in terms of kilowatt hours anywhere in the nation.
Precisely.
Okay.
And consumption and reducing consumption is the sort of thing that would lead to a $96 per year savings if Virginia reduces carbon pollution by 30% per year by tapping things like energy efficiency and thereby reducing consumption. So we're talking about the same thing, absolutely. But don't take my word for it. The electric grid operator, PJM, that operates Virginia's electricity grid and power plants, found that costs would increase by only 1 to 3% under the Clean Power Plan. That is not an estimate of the governor's proposed or directive. And then Dominion found a 2.5% cost increase by 2030 under a similar carbon reduction. So the, for example, $6 billion figure that you cited earlier has since been walked back, I believe, by the State Corporation Commission because it assumed it would require the building of a new nuclear reactor to reduce carbon pollution, and that doesn't appear to be the case anymore. As for early coal retirements, none of our electric sector modeling indicates that you would need to do any early coal retirements. And in closing, I will again just point out that the governor specifically called for a market-based program. That is a well-worn path in the states that are already using these market-based mechanisms to reduce carbon pollution. They have seen their economies grow while they've reduced their carbon pollution. By and large, they actually have lower energy costs than Virginia, even as they reduce their carbon pollution. And the reason that's occurred is because it's a smart and market-based approach that the Air Board has the authority to do so, and I think the Virginia public wants to see the same kind of action as well.
Delegate Lingenfeld.
I'm glad to hear you say the process is important, because if you heard me, you kind of know that's important to me. In your reading of the statute, do you see where the Air Control Board has authority to promulgate regulations beyond the borders of the Commonwealth? Is that your interpretation of the law?
It is not my interpretation of the law, but it is my interpretation that the states that have an existing carbon allowance mechanism has essentially established a common currency that generators in Virginia would be able to tap into. It would not require a multi-state compact.
Okay, so, Mr. Chairman, so you're making the case that it does require multi-state compact, but would you agree or disagree that in the governor's executive order, he makes clear that there's a corresponding relation between his order and out of state? Would you agree with me there?
I would agree that there is a directive from the governor to ensure that the state of Virginia could take part in a larger market. As we all know, the more players in a market, the more efficient it is.
Chairman, if I might,
Delegate Lingenfeld.
for corresponding levels of stringency to limits on CO emissions imposed in other states with such limits. So let me ask it this way. Assuming for a minute that the General Assembly elected to pass legislation that would, in effect, set the governor's view in law, would your view then be that the State Air Control Board could then engage outside of Virginia's territory?
To do what you're describing, absolutely. The General Assembly could take that step.
But, Mr. Chairman, just to be very clear, you are not here to tell us that the State Air Control Board may establish an interstate compact with respect to this executive order.
No, I do not believe it can, and I do not believe it needs to take part in that larger market.
I understand the second part, but I think the first part is important, which is, it takes us back to where I think we need to be, which is in this structure, this constitutional structure, this republic that we live in, it is the legislature that should be drafting and approving legislation that would have the implication of the governor's executive order. That's the point I'm trying to get across.
I hear you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Senator Edwards.
Quick question. Thank you for being here today. Did you have or your organization have any communication with the governor's office or any of his agencies in helping draft this executive order?
No, sir, none.
Okay. Did they ask your opinion about any of the language before it was issued?
No, sir. There was a public process prior to this coming out. It was pursuant to an executive order before that that we took part in as representatives of our members in Virginia, but that was a public process.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Edwards.
Thank you.
is it your understanding that before a multi-state compact is entered into, the General Assembly would have to approve that? or you have?
That is beyond my understanding as far as multi-state compacts in general. But again, I'm quite certain that to take part in that larger marketplace, General Assembly legislation is not required for generators in Virginia to take part in that larger marketplace.
Okay, any other questions? All right, is there any other business to come before the meeting?
Are there other
Thank you.
commenters? Other commenters?
I'd like to make a comment because I'm a medical person. And you all had mentioned that you spoke with, that you've spoken with industrial interests and with environmentalists, but you didn't mention medical professionals. I'm Dr. Janet Eddy, and I work at the Bon Secours Caravan. And I want to applaud the governor's directive. I belong to the Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action, which is a group of doctors and other health professionals committed to measures to mitigate climate change for the sake of our patients. Carbon from fossil fuels increases greenhouse gases, causing climate change, and a few of those effects include extreme heat, increased allergens and pollution in the air, and changes in vector ecology. In humans, these effects worsen asthma and allergies, increase heat-related illness, and move tropical diseases like dengue, chikungunya, and Zika northward, and even malaria. So the effects have already begun. Children, the elderly, impoverished people, and people working outside have the highest risk of illness related to the effects of climate change. And I've been seeing it in some of my patients because many of them work outside and most of them are impoverished. When you consider cost impact, you need to consider the health of the people who live here. The healthier the population, the better able they are to work, and the medical costs go down, which would be huge for Virginia. Last summer, a patient of mine came in with a high fever and delirium. He was a healthy man in his 50s. We sent him to the emergency room assuming that he had blood poisoning. He was admitted to intensive care. All the tests came back negative, and it turned out that the high fever and delirium were due to heat stroke, which is a condition we see never that serious. Usually we catch it early. This man worked as a landscaper and had been working out in the 90+ degree days that we have for months at a time now in Richmond. Last fall, an employee's 10-year-old child died of asthma when she had an attack that the emergency room could not treat. And now we have great, strong medicines for asthma, and we have excellent pediatric ICUs in Richmond, and there's no child who should be dying of this disease in our country. The causes of asthma are multifactorial, but as you get more days with increased air pollution, you get more ozone, and ozone is toxic to people with asthma. And again, we're talking about the elderly and the kids who are at the highest risk. So as time goes on, our medication may become less and less effective. I just want to say that for the sake of human health, we have a moral imperative to move towards sustainable energy and away from fossil fuels. The governor's taken the first step. I don't think he's really necessarily heading right at this moment towards Reggie, but I do want to tell you that I've seen the data from Reggie, and the health benefits over the last 10 or so years that it's been in place have been incredible, and that has translated into economic benefits. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, with that, if there's nothing else, we...
One more.
One more. Okay, yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator Wagner. Members of the Commission and staff, thank you also for having me today. My name is Matt Burke. I am a family physician. I work in the DC Metro, including in the Arlington and Alexandria side of the line. My wife and I are Arlington residents. I am also the Director of State Programs for the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health, which is a huge mouthful based out of Fairfax, Virginia. The mission of the consortium is to develop physician awareness and educational capacity around climate health, essentially turning the face of climate change from polar bears into our children and ourselves. I would very much like to reiterate what Dr. Eddy said about the moral imperative of thinking about this in terms of a human harm and a human health standpoint, because we do know that the climate is changing. It's changed fairly dramatically over the last several decades and is likely to continue to change even more dramatically unless fairly aggressive action is taken on curbing carbon pollution. And as she said, allergens, asthmatic disease, infectious illnesses, and heat stroke are all things that will be affecting our patients over time. Our consortium represents 12 national physician membership academies, including my own, the American Academy of Family Physicians. All said and done, those 12 organizations represent 450,000 doctors, which is half of the physician population in the United States. Right out of Fairfax, George Mason University, which is a real honor for us. And what we're trying to do is get folks to, I think, more deeply appreciate how impactful moving in this direction is in terms of ourselves. And I think that there are a lot of return potentials in terms of human life lost and quality adjusted days if we get this right, which would very much outweigh the economic benefits or potential hardships of transitioning from one industry to another with respect to clean energy. And I would also like to reiterate that there is data, particularly from ADT Associates out of Cambridge, Massachusetts, where they have also a couple of outstanding universities, that suggest that the 9 states that have compacted to be part of RGGI over the last dozen years or so have actually not been met with very significant financial burden in respect to transitioning to clean energy. In fact, some ratepayers have actually seen a 3% reduction in their utility payments, and the number of heart attacks and deadly asthmatic events that have occurred in those states have dropped to the tune of hundreds to tens of thousands, depending on the condition you look at, potentially saving almost 1,000 heart attacks over those states in those several years, and almost 17,000 pulmonary and respiratory related events. That includes states like New Jersey, which are not part of the compact, but are appreciating the clean air benefits from the neighboring states. So I think that there is a very strong both human case to be made from an ethical standpoint, as well as a potentially combined business case to be made if we get this right. When you look at it from that perspective, we, representing those 450,000 physicians, feel very strongly that this is a direction we should move in. Now, I'm not a legislative expert, and I leave that to the Commission and the legislative officials of Virginia to try to navigate, because I appreciate that there are some technical challenges with how this might look. But turning our backs and not moving in a more accelerated direction towards clean energy is potentially impactful for all of us. But there is also very hopeful data to say that if we get this right, we can harness real benefit and real finance from this. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you letting me speak.
Thank you. Anyone else?
As an individual today, I just wanted to agree with Senator Edwards regarding the premature nature of this proceeding. I would just remind you that with regard to the Administrative Procedures Act, typically an administrative action starts with a notice of intention for regulatory action. Such notice has been issued by the Department of Environmental Quality, and as such, I don't believe these proceedings actually have started yet. I think in some sense, I've just observed the curious timing of this hearing, in the fact that we actually haven't had a notice of intention of regulatory action. And we'll just say that, when it seems unreasonable to continue through 3 decades to obstruct responsible action on climate change when it's a scientific fact that we're bearing the impacts of it today, particularly in your district, Senator Wagner, and there's a real need for action. And because the legislature has failed to act in the last several years, it's clear that the governor has taken it upon himself to take these actions. And again, I would just say that we need to take a look at and wait for the regulations to come out. And at this point in time, there has been notice of intention for regulatory action issued by the agency.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Senator Delegate Lindenfelter. Yeah.
I work from
Okay, right. It's been moved and seconded to be adjourned. All those, we don't need a motion. Committee Chairman, we're adjourned.